Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have this panel discussion on AI governance in banking, sponsored by AArete. AArete is a global management consulting and a technology consulting company that is headquartered in Chicago with offices across the world. We serve financial services industry clients and healthcare and higher education clients as well. We have deep expertise, knowledge, clientele with various financial services. We're very excited to be hosting this today for all of you. As you know, artificial intelligence is the most talked about topic in our homes, at our dinner tables, and also at work. We thought would be a great topic for conversation. We have excellent panelists here that joined us today. A little bit about myself. I'll be your moderator. My name is Priya Iragavarapu, and I'm the Vice President of Data Science and Analytics here at AArete. Been with AArete for 2 years, and prior to that, I've had extensive background in the financial industry with my prior experiences in building big data analytics solutions at American Express and US Bank as well. With that said, I'm looking forward to learning from this fantastic group here. Let us get started with some introductions. I would get started with Chris McGee. If you can start us off with who you are, a little bit about your passion for our industry, and what is it that is your point of view, and we can get started with what it is that really is exciting about for you on this topic of AI governance in banking.
Sure. No, thanks, Priya. Thanks for organizing this today. Thanks for having us, and thanks to everyone who's watching and listening in. And either if you're learning about AArete for the first time or you've been following us for a while, we're excited to have you all here today to talk about the topic. So, just a little background on myself. As Priya mentioned, I'm Chris McGee. I lead our financial services practice here at AArete. I've spent almost 2 decades now in the financial services industry, focused with clients in the banking and capital market space, as well as insurance and asset and wealth management. Just to add on a little bit of background to what Priya provided from an AArete perspective, AArete works with financial services clients extensively across probably 4 primary areas, I would say. One is in the profitability improvement and strategic cost reduction space. Second, which is near and dear to the topic we're talking about today, is data and advanced analytics solutions. Third area is in the risk management and cybersecurity space. And then a fourth area probably more encompasses broader digital experience strategies, customer experience, employee experience, and user experience strategies. I'm lucky to be part of such a great organization, and you talked about passion for the topic here today. I think over the last couple decades, my passion's been on seeing the evolution of the industry and how the industry's taken shape. And certainly for others who've been in the industry for a lot longer, you probably can also agree with me or relate to that. And so seeing these disruptions as they take shape as well is just truly really an interest and a passion. And so looking at AI and thinking about the potential in the future that it'll bring to our industry is really incredible. And personally, for my areas of focus have been within risk management, regulatory compliance, and broader strategic business change type of initiatives within the industry over the years. And so looking at the regulatory challenges, the ethical hurdles, the employee impacts, to me are also equally as important. So I was looking forward to discussing today, and thanks again.
Yeah, that's terrific, Chris. Allison, would you want to go next in terms of introducing yourself and also sharing some of your passion based on your work in the banking industry?
Sure. Hi, I'm Allison Sagraves. I've been in the banking industry for more than 25 years. My most recent role while I was in banking was to actually be one of the early chief data officers in the financial industry, which it was such an interesting role. And I'm so excited about AI because so much of what some of the early, 1.0 chief data officers were trying to accomplish, I think will be we were setting up the foundations that now can really be leveraged, and the things that we wanted to do, I think, can now be done on steroids. And so we're going to talk about that today. So I'm really excited about that. So now I'm consulting in this space. I work with data and tech companies, and I also, along with Chris, we're both on the adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon, teaching in a really terrific program about certifying chief data and analytics officers. So very involved in this space, thought leader. I had a piece on this topic in the Harvard Business Review last year, which I hope people will check out. I co-authored. So lots to share. One of my passions really is, I think we're going to go through a couple of years where we're really addressing digital transformation, how we can actually make that happen with Gen AI, why that's kind of eluded us because of the complexity of banking infrastructure. And so I think there's going to be a couple of year period where we need to sort out some of these just like fundamental infrastructural challenges at banks in order to get to the more innovative types of AI. And just one thing on a personal note of interest, I think that aligns to AArete's philosophy of humanizing data for purposeful change is that I think there's a big opportunity to bring more people into the financial system by lowering the cost of entry and doing things like using data to expand access to credit. So once we get beyond the next couple of years of really just shoring up banks, getting them more efficient, operating better, improving customer experience, I think the transformational aspects of what this industry looks like are really, really promising.
Absolutely, Allison. Thank you so much for that introduction. And as an alumni of CDO program at Carnegie Mellon, I completely resonate with everything that you said there. Chris Stevens, could you mind sharing introduction about yourself and also share with us the passion and also how this topic is very relevant for you today?
Sure. So my passion in this topic actually pins on the humanity of it and the human aspect, humans in the loop, and how we keep humans involved as we continue to explore advancing technologies like this, which I'll come back to in a second. But yes, I am faculty with Allison at Carnegie Mellon, actually a proud Pittsburgher, but love being a part of that program. Right now, I'm the field CTO and head of applied AI at a company called Appen. And Appen is an AI data services and platform company, right? Without going into gory detail on what Appen does, but happy to follow up on that with anyone that wants to. But Appen's been in the AI business for about 25 years. And, I was a chief data officer 3 times. I worked at Geico, so I understand financial services from the insurance side of the industry, and big, complex, gnarly organizations and problems. I was chief data officer at Zendesk, and I was also chief data officer at American Eagle Outfitters here in Pittsburgh. So I've taken on the role a couple of times. I understand the changes that you're trying to drive when you get into a large organization through data and analytics. And now I've pivoted off into kind of the vendor space, like I said, focusing on AI. And I mentioned at the beginning of my introduction that the humanity piece of it is what's so important to me. And I love that it aligns with AArete's principles. I love, Allison, that you kind of brought that forward already in the discussion. And, what I think is going to be incredibly important for technology companies, for banks, is how you continue to infuse that human perspective, human point of view, human knowledge, human oversight, right? As you build out these AI systems. And there's a whole myriad of reasons that's important. We'll probably get to as we continue this discussion. But for me, keeping that human piece in there, I think is really important. I was actually just talking to a colleague today, and an interesting pattern that I'm seeing is a lot of teams that are beginning to bring these AI systems to life or experiment are coming kind of from the data science, machine learning space. And there's still some awareness that needs to be raised about how humans are involved in the process of curating data and fine-tuning AI systems in a different way maybe than would have been in traditional machine learning, right? Especially because it's different data oftentimes that we're talking about in the form of documents and text or image and video perhaps, right? And so there's a real key function that humans play in the actual creation of these systems, let alone the oversight piece, which again, I think we'll talk about a lot. But super, super happy to be here. Chris, Priya, and team, thanks for having us. Allison and I have been on a handful of panels together in the past, so we're kind of like the old married couple here, I guess. Sometimes I get philosophical, sometimes she does. So we'll see how this one goes today, but we're super happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for touching some of those very key important aspects of human in the loop with respect to building these AI solutions. Let's kick us off with these discussion today. Chris McGee, I wanted to ask you, with everything that is going on in the AI and how banks are facing these challenges in areas of AI development and deployment and building all of this in a responsible way through hyper automation, through AI, human oversight, and making sure there is data, privacy, and security, and juggling all of this together. What are you seeing in the banking sector pertinent to AI, and what is it that you're seeing that is being effectively leveraged through AI right now?
I mean, it's exploding. I mean, it just really is. And I guess even before I get into it, I might just preface that everything that things that I share here are well documented, well communicated, public knowledge, right? So, I mean, there is just so much that's happening right now. Going back to my point around disruption that we're seeing, I think the point that Chris brought up just previously around traditional ML models, right? The industry's been leveraging traditional ML models and AI for years now, right? I mean, there's been plenty of use cases that have been brought forward, primarily around predictive modeling and predictive analytics, and then also market predictions, and then a second area mostly around operational impact, operational efficiency, right? And then now you add this Gen AI lens to it, and you start to see the tremendous number of use cases that are developing and that are coming out. And you look at how AI is being used across thousands of bank employees and the number of roles that are coming out from front office to back office, hundreds of research roles and thousands of job openings in the AI space. They're all pointing towards examples of how it's starting to be more effectively leveraged and starting to be developed, and how it's going to really impact the industry going forward. I think there's been studies that also been done to note that the financial services industry, in particular banks, could likely have the most to gain. And that's, early days type of research. But again, you look at which industries are most ripe for disruption, and banking is one of the largest in terms of disruption from the AI trend that's coming. You think about it in terms of going back to improving productivity, operational efficiency. There's this whole idea of new ways of working. So you're seeing use cases around reducing manual effort across all types of operational processes. And in particular, one, for example, is where you have your risk compliance, your legal, your audit folks, your traditional knowledge workers across the banks, that could really use and benefit more time to actually focus on their specific jobs, and not the manual tasks and other things that bog them down on a day-to-day basis. Being able to leverage AI in those capacities is now making tremendous impact across the banks as a starting point. And that's been a main focus, I think, in terms of a number of use cases. I think related to that, you see enhancements across risk management, right? There's plenty of use cases across AML. There's new practices coming out around continuous verification and authentication techniques and modeling. Certainly, Allison, I think you brought this up slightly earlier, but around like credit underwriting and the ability to reduce the default rates across your portfolios, and leveraging AI in that capacity is obviously another thing that's really taking shape. I think related to that then comes the improvements to compliance and how you're querying supervisory data and using chatbots to across regulations and textual analysis across supervisory and regulatory documentation to be able to do that analysis. These are really incredible advances that are being made. And then you take it out of like the middle and back office and you start to focus it on the front office side. And now you're starting to really see where can it impact the customers, right? So how does it drive better customer engagement? Where you have, financial services firms that are providing information more readily to their financial advisors to be able to engage their client base more readily and more timely. And also the ability to have automated contacts on a continuous basis with clients where you didn't have that ability previously, or where you had limited ability to do that previously. And then really the gold mine is on developing new products. So where can AI be leveraged to really get down deep into the customer journeys that a lot of firms have been trying to capture for so long, but haven't been able to successfully capture yet. So being able to understand those customer journeys and then identify new customer needs and priorities to be able to develop new financial products to support those customers. I mean, that's also something that you see taking shape. So a lot of good examples is what I'm trying to say. I mean, and there's plenty more, but that's just a highlight of some of the things we're seeing across our clients and across the banks that we're working with as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. You really set the stage for us in terms of really establishing what are the various use cases that are going on in the banking industry. Now, Allison, if I may ask you, what are the challenges that banks are facing now pertinent to leveraging AI in their industry, in this industry, and where do you think they can improve and do a better job here?
Yeah, I think the challenges are just that the cost of mistakes, of getting something wrong, have magnified because of the amount of data that's being used. So I would say that, drawing another parallel back to the early chief data officer days, I think that banks are primarily in a bit of a defensive mode, and there's sort of offense and defense, using defense to sort of shore up operations, shore up regulatory compliance and so forth. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Because the current uncertainty around the regulatory landscape makes it very hard to do a lot of things that it is theoretically possible to do with AI. So I think we have to kind of take this in steps. So I really see this as there's sort of practical AI, as you at AArete talk about. There's Gen AI, which we'll talk about some use cases there. And then I think there's breakthrough AI. And I think that we're going to have to attack those in stages, primarily because we're such a highly regulated industry. I recently led a panel, and we had one of the innovation officers from one of the largest banks in the country, along with regulators and people from fintechs. And when we were talking about AI, I was all prepared to hear about all these exciting things that they're doing. And the person from this large bank said, boring is the new sexy. And so she started to talk about what this large bank associated with being on the frontier of AI is doing. They're using AI, like Chris said, many banks are doing and have been doing, using traditional AI in fraud, AML, compliance, and the lift in these areas is significant. I mean, you can knock out 75 or 90% of false positives and really lower your costs, improve your risk profiles and so forth. And the regulatory risk on those types of functions is low because these are internal functions, but you're improving in many ways the customer experience because you're improving your capabilities around fraud and so forth. So I think that most of the medium to big banks have been successful in operating at this sort of traditional practical AI and are moving into Gen AI. I think one of the most interesting areas that I am really excited about is using Gen AI to accelerate, bring more velocity to legacy modernization. It's been my belief, having suffered through as one of the early chief data officers, that one of the most challenging reasons that banks have struggled to get their arms around data is that the underlying infrastructure in banks of legacy systems is so complex. And we've been talking about digital transformation for how many years now? How many banks have successfully actually achieved digital transformation? So now the idea of applying Gen AI, applying co-pilots to the software development process to be able to increase velocity around documentation, transforming legacy applications, dealing with the fact that we have dwindling talent pools that are able to deal with these programs, minimal documentation. Using Gen AI for this, I think, could be really a huge accelerant to digital transformation, which will then allow banks to focus on what Chris was talking about, the breakthrough AI, which is really building new products for customers. But I also feel that we could potentially be underrepresenting the benefits to customers of just cleaning up this legacy infrastructure, because I know from having been in banking for years and years and years that most customer problems come from the complex array of these systems, which are so hard to integrate and bring a single source of truth to the customer in a seamless interface, that by cleaning up this legacy infrastructure once and for all, I think is going to advance the industry significantly. So that's what I'm most excited about on Gen AI, and I can't wait to hear what other people think.
Oh, very good points, Allison. Absolutely. I really like the way you are focusing on trying to leverage bring velocity to legacy system modernization. I think that's a huge opportunity there. Chris Stevens, would you want to elaborate more on the same topic of what are the challenges you're seeing within the banking industry with AI and where they can improve?
Yeah, in terms of challenges, I've got a couple of thoughts, and I'm going to try to pull together some threads of what Chris and Allison suggested a minute ago. First and foremost, and I guess in no particular order, but skills, I think is going to be a big challenge, right? I think, you see these news stories that like AI engineers at some of these model builders are being paid like obscene, completely, literally obscene salaries. And, I don't think that banks are going to go need to hire all these AI researchers and build their own models, but you do need people that understand how these systems work and so forth. So I think there's going to be a skills issue. On the skills thing, I don't know if people in the audience don't know who Kent Beck is. Kent Beck was one of the people that invented Agile software programming methodology in whatever the early 90s, whatever that would have been. And he put a tweet out, now it's like last April or so, but I almost think about it every day. I don't have the tweet in front of me, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. But he says something along the lines of, I've been reluctant to try ChatGPT, and today I got over my reluctance, and now I know why I was so reluctant. And then he goes on to say, the value of 90% of my skills just went to 0. However, the other 10% just went up 1,000x. So now I need to recalibrate. That actually might be verbatim because I've talked about this so many times. But anyways, I think about that all the time for a whole bunch of reasons. And one reason I actually never thought about, Chris, you alluded to a second ago, which is, if I'm in a, whatever role it might be that you were referring to in a bank, the automation of a lot of this flow by way of AI or generative AI will actually allow me to focus on my job or however was it you put it, right? So I think there's this innate fear that like AI is going to come and take all our jobs, right? And if you go back to this Kent Beck quote from his tweet, and if you believe what he says, I happen to believe what he says, that yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we all do that AI can and or should replace, right? And a lot of these roles in banking, or like I said, I worked in insurance, there's a lot of rote process stuff. It just has to be done, right? And if that is in the 90% of my skills that AI can take away, that's great, because now I can spend my time with human creativity and problem solving, and like you said, Chris, like doing my job, right? So I think that's one thing. So yes, skills I think are going to be a challenge for banks and frankly everybody, but upskilling in the nature of AI, how jobs are impacted by AI is one half of it. But the other part is thinking about what's your 10% of the thing that you do and how do you recalibrate your value to your organization around whatever that is. That's probably philosophical, Allison, so I've taken the philosophical hat so far in the discussion. Another interesting one as a data person is like Gen AI ready data. A lot of these systems, LLMs and Gen AI, problems that folks are trying to solve aren't on the data that Allison spent her entire career trying to build governance around, trying to build master data management around, trying to build good processes and the modern data stack to orient and manage that data. It's like the permafrosted data that was sitting in S3 buckets or whatever the banks might have, all these documents, right? I think about my time in insurance, and we had like decades of documents that have to do with claims process and all this stuff that literally was kind of like permafrost. And now it's the gold mine. It's so rich with all this information, right? And so at a bank, just thinking about all these documents that have been maintained and stored, and someone in risk probably said it's risky that we're doing this. All of a sudden, there's a ton of value there, right? So getting that data ready for your AI system or your Gen AI thing, I think is going to be a challenge. Maybe it's an opportunity to flip that around, right? And then, well, I think both Allison and Chris also mentioned, underwriting and kind of some of those opportunities there. I think the challenge we got to think about there is the safety side of that, right? And I know we're going to talk more about regulation, so I'm not going to branch into regulation just this second, but, using generative AI and whatnot, are you thinking about things like bias and so forth as you're, getting into using it in functions like that? It doesn't take long to Google the news and find an insurance company or a bank that just got fined a lot of money, right, for bias and algorithmic underwriting and so forth. So just a thing to think about, that some of these opportunities come with an inherent risk attached to things like safety. But I love this idea that boring is the new sexy, right? Because there's a lot of, basic work to be done to get your data ready for these models, to think about these use cases. And it doesn't have to be, the rocket ship equivalent of banking. Yes, we need to get there, but there's a lot of value that can come from this kind of boring is new sexy kind of use cases. So anyhow.
I love your comment about the 90% and the 10%, because I don't know if anyone heard the CEO of NVIDIA, Huang, just recently talking about the criticality of domain knowledge, the value of domain knowledge. So I think that is so essential, is domain knowledge. And then when I talked about the movement toward legacy modernization using developer co-pilots, the initial studies have shown that those developers that have had the most benefit have been the most skilled developers. So I think that's an interesting observation. So that kind of gets to your 10 and 90.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't mind, Priya, I'm going to riff on the domain thing. Something that, because of where I am now, I'm talking to a lot of customers about the problems they're trying to solve. And what's interesting about, thinking in a bank, right? And what's going to be an impactful generative AI use case for a bank, or specifically maybe an LLM application for a bank. The most value producing one for the bank likely involves, as Allison just said, deep domain expertise, right? Like ChatGPT and its peer models out there in the world, Llama and Anthropic and Cohere and all these other models that are all great. For like generalized human knowledge, they're all, perfectly sufficient, right? But when you're the bank and you want to get, I think Chris in his opening talked about, like internal knowledge center for, domain expertise for like call center agents or advisors or whatever. You can't do that at fill in the blank bank without the domain experts from that bank, right? They understand that space. And so there's work for them to do there, right? So that maybe that's in their 10% of new value they can add to the bank by helping the models understand that domain. And the further you go into that, the more that domain expertise is going to be necessary, right? And I happen to have the privilege of talking to one of the founders of one of these model building companies. And he kind of talked about this triangle. And at the bottom is like general human knowledge. So these models are all great at like the French Revolution and, other whatever basic general human knowledge. But as you go up that pyramid, along the way, you find teachers and nurses and bankers and Series 7 certified financial advisors and insurance underwriters and physicists and whatever. Right? And as you go up, there's more and more specified knowledge. And those models aren't trained on that stuff just yet, right? They're working on that. So if you want your model in your bank to work on your domain and your data, there's going to be your people, right? They're going to have to be part of that. And as an opportunity, back to the skills question, right? I think that's an opportunity for people.
Absolutely. Very, very valid points, Chris. I certainly resonate with the fact that the domain knowledge experts, the business teams and the technology teams are now converging. And it is a change that always was very inevitable, but now it more than ever, it is actually necessary for this to come together. There's always been a kind of a friction between the business and the technology teams, but at this point in time is when truly we have to work in an amalgamated matrix organization to realize the benefits from both sides together. With that, I think that is a very good segue into the next question that I wanted to put forward to this panel, is specific about the AI risk management and monitoring. Banks have always been quant heavy, and they've always had quantitative models that they've already been leveraging, and regulation is always a very, very key component. And if you think of, say, the SR 11.7 that banks are already using in terms of following the guidance of the model risk management, specific to in the age of AI, though, this question, we can start with Allison. Specific to the age of AI, Allison, do you think the SR 11.7 guidance is enough? What are banks already doing from a risk assessment standpoint? They're already doing a lot throughout, the history with this process. What has changed with AI in the mix? Is there anything that the banks are overlooking or missing in this process?
Yeah, so I think that I think the governance practices that have been established in the past, 5 to 10 years around data governance, around model governance, those are all leverageable. And I think I said in the HBR piece, they were maybe too much for the occasion, but now we've kind of met the moment. So protecting against risk is job number one. So while I think the constructs that are in place, the current regulation, I don't think it's comprehensive enough for the nature of the models of AI. And I'll just mention a few dimensions of what these models contain that I don't think is properly addressed by just looking at a traditional model risk management framework. Certainly we're talking about volumes of data that we've not contemplated before. We're talking about things like fairness. Especially you're looking at a bank. If you are turning down people for credit, can you establish that you've done that in a fair way, which kind of ties into explainability. Can you explain why someone was rejected? Were they rejected fairly? Can you explain why? I mean, that ability to trace the decision-making underpinnings of a model is essential when you get into things like credit decisioning, which is why I think I'm thinking the boring is the new sexy piece is kind of where we are right now, because that I think we can handle the risk tolerance of that kind of business case and business use. Talent is another one. Just having the talent to be able to do the model validation. Having the talent to deploy the models is one thing. Having the talent to validate the models is another. I think with the fact that the nature of these models they're so dynamic and they're always changing, I don't think we have a way to account for how you reproduce the results of these models. Certainly the data protection and privacy issues are front and center. How do we integrate these models with the people that are doing the work? Chris talked about that. And then ultimately there's an interesting issue about sustainability and just banks are very, very focused on ESG and the energy that running these models consumes is another dimension that was never contemplated. So there's a series of dimensions that increase the scope of governance. I think the good news is that we've been having conversations about ethics. We've been having conversations about privacy. We've been pulling in more and more people around organizations over the past few years as the big data world has expanded. So I think that there is precedent now set for expanding the conversation. And certainly the issues that I just talked about are not just issues that somebody at a bank needs to say, hey, we need to worry about bias. It used to be that you had to sell these ideas internally. These are now headline news. So everyone in the organization is saying, hey, I'm worried about bias in this model. So we have society now asking questions. So it's really kind of in reverse, which is, I think, a very positive development. So I guess sum up the answer, no, what we have is not adequate. I think we know that. We are migrating toward having more holistic standards and regulations, but this is very much evolving. So stay tuned.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Chris Stevens, do you want to share your perspective on it? Anything more you want to add?
First and foremost, yes, very much evolving space. Some people like to use the sort of introduction of the internet browser as an analogy for what's happening right now. I think that's woefully insufficient for the impact that AI will have. It's closer to like electricity in my mind. But that aside, sticking with the insufficient analogy of the internet browser, right? Where we are with generative AI in particular in the industry, or in industries in particular in banking, it's like 95 or whatever, right? It's so early. And then if you play that analogy out a little bit, in 1995, e-commerce didn't exist. Think about the impact that e-commerce has on the world today, right? Positive and negative, but the impact of e-commerce. Social media didn't exist, right? So there's all these derivatives that are entire industries that didn't exist when the internet browser gained prominence. What's the analogy? I don't know the answer to that. What's the analogy to that, right? I'm not even sure if Mark Zuckerberg was born when the internet browser, right? Was long. So that's one thing of who knows. So to build on, this is an ever evolving space. This is a very much ever evolving space. Anyways, back to thinking about risk. I'm really encouraged by the work that like NIST is doing with the AI risk management framework. Allison and I's boss, actually at Carnegie Mellon, is a part of the team at NIST that's helping. The dean of the Heinz College where we work, by the way, is helping put that together. So I'm very encouraged by work like that. I guess the EU Act is coming to fruition. Singapore has another similar act. President Biden put out the executive order. So there's good work happening in that space where we're beginning to shape what these things look like. NIST is not yet formal regulation, right? But it's a framework and a guideline. And it calls for a lot of work around, there's humans, I keep talking about humans, there's humans doing work in this space. And what I like about how NIST is approaching the problem is it's sort of like tracking and recording the work that humans are doing. So all the questions that Allison and Chris have mentioned about monitoring and bias and the other things you would do in a bank to think about risk, NIST is specifically calling on top of that to what actions did humans take along this journey? You need to record those and tell me about those, right? So that you can make sure that you're compliant with something like that risk management framework. So it's like all the work that a human does across that AI lifecycle, making sure that we have that tracked and monitored and understood. And then just earlier this week, I had a conversation with our head of audit. So then you think about, well, what's on the other side of this risk coin, right? And it's the audit team, right? And now you start to bring in the skills question again, right? So God bless these audit teams. They're going to have to figure out how to audit this stuff, right? And somewhere in the middle of this stuff is this super complex, if not black box, very opaque thing that is the model, right? And then all the actions the bank might take around that, like building audit frameworks for that, like, again, I think in an evolving and unformed space right now, but a lot of interesting things happening there. And like one of the interesting questions for me at the center of that, whether it's the audit or risk side of the equation, is who actually owns the risk? Like certainly if, let's say the four of us work at a bank, certainly if our bank builds a generative AI chatbot or whatever, right? Some version of the things that it says we own that risk, right? But if we're using an off-the-shelf like foundational model from somebody else, I don't know that this is resolved. Like who owns the risk of what the model says versus how we implement it or it manifests in our customer experience? I think that's an interesting question. I don't know that it's been answered. Like where does that risk get assigned? Probably varies by contract, but just another interesting dimension to the problem, I think.
Oh my God, you opened up a can of worms, Chris, with that comment. You saw recently with what happened with an airline industry sending out fake offers through their website, through the generative AI. applications. So it is absolutely, I believe the buck stops with the CEO. So, definitely the bank would be 100% responsible for the decisions it is taking for that organization. But Chris, McGee, do you have an opinion on it? What do you have any additional information you want to share with us with respect to this?
Yeah, I mean, I just hitting on Chris, you brought up the black box piece of it, and I was thinking along those same lines. It's when you have to think about as you're going through this like proper use case selection, right? And the factors that go into selecting these use cases going forward, because everyone's, every node, every process, every control, every report, every person, is being tagged for, we could use AI here or AI there, and this is how we can do this. That's how we can do it. So certainly there's the importance. The obvious importance is around the investment decisions and the funding for these different use cases, and that requires, very diligent ROI analysis, cost benefit analysis. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. But then I think you get to this other level when it comes to your question, Priya, around risk and having the vigilance to be able to assess the risks of these different use cases during the selection process, and making sure that there is a realization that there's definitely things you don't know that you need to seek out, but there's also things that you just don't know you're going to find or that are going to get you, and you need to be prepared for those. And so I think that's like, Chris, when I think about your black box comment, it's the importance now more than ever of being able to, when you're explaining the use cases, typically you got to that point where you're explaining what this is going to benefit, and then it all happens and it's in a black box. No, you need to be able to open that up now and have a conversation, a detailed one, around the risks inherent within that black box, so that you understand what you're taking on and what that's going to mean for your organization going forward. And that's got to be incorporated into your funding and investment decision, along with your cost benefit and your ROI analysis. And I think that's super important. And so I liked when you said that earlier. I think that's a very important point.
Something that I think about a lot. Earlier I come to the data world by way of the analytics world, right? And I used to work for SAS a number of years ago, and we had neural nets and whatnot developed way back in the day. That the core technology isn't entirely new, right? But it always seemed to me that the reason that most of your analytic implementations in banks and certainly regulated spaces were like simple decision trees, logistic regressions, it's because they were explainable. It was really easy to explain to an auditor that this variable has this influence on this decision. There might be 100 of them, so it's complicated-ish, right? But you can list them out in rank order and say this one, this one, this one, right? And so again, it's kind of an open question into the risk management and audit space of now the model itself is really complex, right? And it's one thing to say, where does the risk belong? Priya, you're probably right, the CEO, but some CEOs might say, well, we're using someone else's model. The risk belongs over there, right? But either way, someone's got to be able to explain this thing, right? I think that's going to be a really important question, banking or otherwise.
Absolutely. I think we want transparency, and through transparency is where the equitability of applying models is going to really matter, in terms of without transparency, we will not know why a credit request or a credit application was denied, and if there was any sort of inherent bias that was part of it. So it is extremely important. I think this has been a very good discussion. If I would like to move on to the third question on this panel discussion, which is Chris Stevens, I would like to start off with you on this one. The key requirements in terms of banks in this age of AI is to really help build out their AI governance frameworks, and which is really not something that is good to have anymore. It's absolutely necessary. And we all just talked about how complex the risk assessment portion of it. And now in order to be able to effectively manage the risk, now banks or any of the organization, they need to govern the AI. So with respect to AI governance, what is it that you are seeing that is commonly missed from a governance standpoint, and what is crucial, something very crucial that maybe even deprioritized or that's not considered as too high of an importance, but that is something very important in your opinion?
First of all, I'll go back to the NIST AI risk management framework. I think it's the best thing we have right now. And so my advice to a bank would be go learn it, understand it, to begin to think about how to apply it, right? Another thing I think is that, a lot of banks are taking a careful approach, as they should be, in building these kind of internal facing use cases. That's a good way to start, right? I think it also allows you a safer place to figure some of this stuff out, right? Again, maybe semi-philosophical, but for a while there was this kind of push about we should stop this development. We got to figure out the risks before we go, right? I'm of the camp that we can't stop. In certain sectors in the world, the word adversary means something very specific. There are other parts of this world and adversaries of the West that aren't going to stop. And so in that regard, we don't have a choice, I happen to think. And then when you reduce that into your industry, okay, maybe the word adversary is the wrong word, but this work is happening, right? Advancements are happening. So your competitors are going down these paths. So there's going to be maybe I'm like a incrementalist, like an agile person. I brought up Kent Beck, kind of like by nature. So we're going to have to learn our way into where the problems are, right? Because I don't think we have time to try to think about where they all are, because we're never going to figure out where they all are, right? And so if I'm a bank and I'm implementing an internal use case, so there's a firewall between a credit decision and a customer, being ourselves, right? Then in doing so, I can begin to find the places where there's a pothole or there's a hole in my process and so on. So then you begin to close those organically as you come across them, right? And I don't know, I think we're gonna have to accept that we're also gonna have toe stubbing and worse, free plane tickets and some guy got a free car, right? Stuff like that's gonna happen. I'm not being glib about it. I'm not responsible for someone's plane ticket being free, but these things are gonna happen. And being tolerant, if you're going to go down this path, being tolerant of the fact that you're going to have to figure some of these things out as you go, right? Folks like Allison and Chris and Priya, you've kind of been in this space for a long time, understand the basic shape, right? And, I'm trying to help companies bring AI systems to life in my current role, so I understand the basic shape. But all of us together even, there's probably some things that we would miss. And I think companies are going to have to tolerate a little bit of that, right? I don't know how to quantify that into risk tolerance at a bank and that kind of stuff. And the bank, based on this podcast, I'll probably never get a job at a bank, but just kidding. But yeah, I think there's going to be some of that so I don't know specifically what's missing. Your question is in the spirit of what's missing. I don't know specifically what's missing, but I guarantee there's a lot of stuff that's missing, and we're just going to have to find those as we go, right? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, keep an open mind. Our CEO always says, be a public learner and don't be afraid of being a public learner. Absolutely. Going back to Chris McGee, please share your thoughts and comments on the risk assessment that banks are doing, and what is it that you think is important, and what you're seeing that is amiss there.
From a governance perspective, that's being documented more and more. You can look at, there's plenty of market research on this and surveys that have been taken recently about who owns AI within your organizations, who owns these use cases, right? So going back to the point around use case selection earlier, and so I think maybe not necessarily a miss entirely, but certainly this whole idea of analyzing ownership alignment across the organization is something that probably needs to be addressed more and more. And the reason I say this is because when you look at the data, the majority of responses in a lot of these surveys is that technology owns these AI use cases. They own AI in terms of based on how the question is worded, right? The questions can be worded differently in the surveys, but the idea is that technology comes out as the leader from an ownership perspective. And not to say that technology shouldn't own it, but the reality is that as you move from back to middle to front office, and you look at how these use cases get applied from an operational perspective, and then across your risk and compliance and other functions, finance, and then you start to move into more of your client-facing roles, it's really the business that understands the interaction between the clients in that regard. And then that's where the ownership needs to be addressed or looked at between business and technology. And it's not an uncommon problem that we've seen for decades in terms of how other technology integrations and adoptions have taken. And then you have to think through that ownership alignment between the business and technology. And the reason I say that is because when you go back to your point around risk and looking at being more vigilant around the risk, the business is going to understand the risks of implementing some of these things will take to their customers and to the market. And that's something that technology needs to be aware of, and technology might not necessarily just see because they're not as close to it as the business is, and they need to work hand in hand. So that's when you start to really have to think about, governance is one thing, but making sure that there is that level of interaction and alignment as you move forward on these things, particularly around the risk points that we were raising earlier.
Chris, do you think that ownership should lie in some kind of chief AI officer function? And, we're seeing some of that emerge in places. Do you think that ownership should lie there? If so, where do you think that role should live? What scope do they have? Like, one of the things Allison and I said, we met years ago, we were on a panel together. Yep. One of the things that was interesting is there were 4 CDOs on this panel, and we all basically had different jobs, actually, right? That's a whole other panel. But it was like some governance, some analytics, some data engineering, whatever, right? And so you think about, you're the chief AI officer. Like, okay, maybe you own the use cases or the risk or whatever that means. But I don't know, what are you seeing from your seat, Chris, that who should own that? Where should they be? What does it mean to own that?
Yeah, certainly that discussion's obviously happening. I would agree on that point entirely. And that type of role is necessary, is going to continue to evolve and be necessary. I think it's related to, if I'm thinking back, in the last couple of years, how you have traditional CIOs that are moving into more of these chief product officer type of roles that sit on the business side. So moving out of tech and into the business side, and for obvious reasons, as you use more technology to drive better customer personalization and the like to improve your business. Right. I think that this trend on the AI side from a governance perspective is probably going to follow a similar path. And similar to how, probably Allison, you could talk about this in terms of where the chief data officers traditionally reported to, and then where they migrated to, moving from, CIO or CTO alignment into more of a alignment with marketing or with the CEO on the business side, as data has obviously become more important on the business side as well. So yeah, I certainly see that trend evolving moving forward.
That's a very good point, Chris. Allison, what are your thoughts on enabling or on some of the aspects that is very important from an AI governance standpoint, and what is it that you're seeing working well and not working well in the AI governance front?
So I think that, again, we kind of lived through an earlier era of this with CDOs. I feel like in some ways we were the guinea pigs. And so taking those constructs, putting them on steroids, including some of the other dimensions we talked about, like explainability, volume of data, talent, sustainability, those other dimensions. So more people need to be involved in the conversation. I think one thing that was learned, that's been learned over the past few years, just as we tried to implement these huge organizational, cultural change initiatives, is how to do this smartly. I think there's a tendency to, this is Allison's opinion right now. There's a tendency to want to democratize everything and kind of have a peanut butter approach where everybody gets some training and everybody learns a little bit. And I'm not against that at all. I think we all need to be public learners. We all, whether it's in our current jobs, whether it's as citizens, whether it's as parents, everybody needs to be doing that. Okay, that said. However, I think from an organizational standpoint, I think we need to ruthlessly prioritize the most impactful domains within an organization where you can achieve real value and go deep. I think it's better to go narrow and deep in a particular domain and really mine real value. So like whether that's legacy modernization, whether that's boring is the new sexy in some of these compliance and risk areas, but to go really deep in 1, 2, or 3 select areas, as opposed to being kind of superficial across more areas, I think will result in more transformational value that can be quantified and help fund the journey. Having said that, I think it's important to have a center of excellence to help establish standards and common infrastructure from which these initial forays use common infrastructure so that you can scale. I think that was a learning from earlier generations, is be focused and really find real problems that need a solution that AI can solve, demonstrate that value, rinse and repeat, and have real discipline around that. I think that is critical.
Maybe this is a philosophical point, but I've actually been thinking about something similar, and I love the ruthless prioritization point. I think Allison's giving the recipe to prevent what I'm about to describe. So if you go back in time to like 2010, and Mark Andreessen says software is eating the world, and thus kicks off like the era of digital transformation, basically, right? Everyone's got to go be a software company. And I think if you started in time at 2010 and you plotted what we thought was going to happen, right? You would get some, way up here. This is the expectation that what we thought was going to happen to banks, insurance companies, retailers, whatever, based on this digital transformation. And then I think if you plot what really happened, of course, it's not quite the same, right? My joke here is that the delta between these two lines is all the money the consultants made. Sorry. But anyways, the fact of the matter is that what we thought was going to happen, what really happened is probably not quite that, right? Doesn't mean it's disappointing. It just is probably not, if we look forward back then, that's not what we thought was going to happen. So now it's 2023. I know it's not anymore. But at the end of 2022, ChatGPT is launched into the world, and we all begin this new era of generative AI and whatnot. So now we're like starting over again with this new thing, and maybe it's remanifesting a lot of digital transformation themes like Allison talked about. But either way, it's also very different, right? And so if we look forward from today, our expectations of what's going to happen in the world looks like this again, right? And so I think if you listen to this and you only take away one thing, go back 2 minutes and take away what Allison said, because that's your recipe for how to not have this happen again, right? Like get really focused on specifically value creating things and do those and learn from those and so on. Otherwise, I said electricity beforehand, but it's gonna be a while, right? We're gonna fumble around in the dark a little bit unless we really get hyper-focused. So that's building on Allison's point, that's something I kind of worry about.
The Delta methodology approach, very exciting, absolutely, very gripping. Thank you so much, Chris, for that information, and Allison for kicking off that train of thought. Let's get to our closing comments. I want our viewers to walk away with some key takeaways. Allison, can I start with you with 1, 2, or 3 key takeaways that you want our viewers to take away from this conversation?
Well, you asked for 1, 2, or 3. I have 5 fundamentals for making progress with AI. Number 1, get real. Focus on real problems and get started with urgency, but you need the patience to scale. So there's that balance of urgency and patience. And recognize that in banking, this is likely going to be incremental over the next couple of years by the nature of the business and the regulatory environment, but change will be monumental when we get to scale. So that's just a few years away, in my opinion. Number 2, boring is the new sexy. Be practical, show value, whether it's legacy modernization, risk compliance to fund the journey. I think we're not going to see so much of the customer-facing work out of the gate. But again, that doesn't mean that these boring things are not helping the customer, because I think they are. Number 3, responsible is the new bold. You're not creating value if you're not implementing AI in a responsible way. That is just game over if you are not responsible. So in this field, boldness has been praised. I think we need to put equal, if not more, weight on being responsible. Number 4, get in shape. I think we as people need to get in shape. We as companies need to get in shape. This is going to be a long, unpredictable journey. We need to be mentally agile. We need to be physically agile, both as people and as organizations, because the amount of change is going to be unpredictable, significant, and it's hard to execute that if you're inflexible, either in your own way of thinking or if you have an inflexible organization with a hierarchical structure. So I think that we need to get in shape to be able to succeed in this long, but I think hopefully very exciting journey. And then finally, number 5, this is a we thing. We need to go all in, and we need to go all in together, align with trusted partners, AArete being a great example of that, who are focusing on practical AI and the human side of AI. And I think what you at AArete talk about being public learners, to me, that is the best advice of all.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was certainly very informative. Chris McGee, can you share your key takeaways with our viewers?
Yeah, I keep coming back to, so probably for about the last year or so, since we saw what happened with Silicon Valley and Signature and the disruption within the industry back in Q1 of last year, keep coming back to this concept of you can't have great employee experiences or great customer experiences without great risk management, right? And I think that it applies here as well to a lot of the discussion that we've been having around AI. And it's really fundamental to think about these use cases and the way that AI is going to shape and evolve, and the way the industry will mature, or the use cases will mature over time, along the lines of many of the different areas that Allison just shared. But underlying that, underlying that is this vigilance around the inherent risks, and being sure that you continue to monitor and assess and identify and remain focused on those, because ultimately who's being impacted at the end of the day is either your employees or your customers. And that's critically important. And so I keep coming back to that thought, and I think that's what I would leave with everyone today.
Oh, fantastic, Chris. Absolutely. Chris Stevens, any final takeaways that you want to share with us?
I'm just glad you didn't make me follow Allison's 5 things there. I wasn't ready with my own 5 things. Allison's 5th one, it's a we thing. I talked about humans at the beginning, sort of imploring all of us that are thinking about these problems and trying to understand how to bring them to life in our organizations or in the banks, maybe that are part of the audience for this, is the continual drive to keep humans involved in these processes. It's not magic, right? The way that these systems come to life is incredibly complex computer science, obviously, but that's at the core of it. Everything that happens around it, what use cases you pick, what domain expertise you need to include in there, how you fine-tune your model, all these things, it's actually not magic. It's brought to life by humans. And I don't just mean humans doing work, but humans imparting value, humans like values, humans imparting knowledge into these models. The model builders are, working on things like math and reasoning. How can we get these models to be really great at math and reasoning? It reminds me of like when we're all in high school and we're like, I don't need to learn calculus. What am I learning this stuff for? I'm never going to use calculus, right? And it's not that these foundation models need to become calculus machines, but humans' ability to do really complex reasoning continues to set us apart. And so bringing those skills and the humanity on top of these systems, I think, if anyone's out there trying to put together an AI system, there's so many places in that life cycle and that flow that have got to have humanity plugged in. And then tying into that, my Kent Beck tweet about, any person out there that's thinking about what impact is this going to have on me, my job, my life, the world that I live in, it probably is going to have an impact, and some of it's going to fall into that 90% bucket, right? Allison and I are data leaders. It's quite possible that the data team of a large bank in the future consists of 1/10 of as many people, because a lot of these things have been automated away, right? And so I'm just thinking about those. What are your skills that you can put into this 10% bucket that have 1,000x value to the rest of us, right? And focus on that.
Oh, that is a terrific takeaway for us. Absolutely. So, panelists, I have personally learned a lot from this conversation, from this discussion, and it certainly was fun just seeing all of these sharp minds share your thoughts. I hope you all have just as much fun as I did, and I hope the viewers too have very good takeaways from this. Thank you so much for your contribution today.